So I was going to be one of the four team leaders, which was for me that was I was the junior of the four, not by a lot, but the other guys were I considered to be like the a class above me. They were just had been around another 3 or 4 years and had a little more experience. So I was kind of starstruck, and awed that I would have this opportunity. But he brought me into his office and again, it was the kind of colonel that you were nervous anytime you went into his office, even though we had a pretty good relationship. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard it from him, but he said, "Hey, John, or Dailey, Gunny, he probably would have called me. You know what my expectations are. You can pick whoever you want, but they have to be tough, rugged bastards with hard backs and strong feet." And everything else after that was lost.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's adytonppc.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're opening up the Green Notebook of a Marine Raider and lifelong student of the profession, John Dailey. John published his memoir, Tough Ragged Bastards, last year, and in this conversation, we dive into the experiences, reflections, and lessons that shaped a decades-long career in Marine Special Operations. From the early days of Force Recon to the founding of MARSOC, John has had a front row seat to history, and now he's helping shape the next generation of warriors by passing on these hard-earned lessons. I actually recorded this conversation, I think about 8-9 months ago, and I recently enjoyed listening to it all over again. His thoughts on leadership, self-discovery, and post-military transition resonated even more the second time around. He talks about the mental game of combat, the unexpected benefits of meditation, and how reading and writing helped him grow not just as a warrior, but as a person. We also explore the idea of wearing jackets throughout our careers, these roles and personas that we put on to succeed, and what it takes to eventually shed them and rediscover who we really are. John's journey is a powerful reminder that growth doesn't stop at retirement, and it's sometimes the best thing we can offer is our story. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, John Dailey.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
John, thank you. Thank you for making time today. I recently read Tough Rugged Bastards, a memoir of a life in Marine Special Operations. And I'm really excited just to have you on the show today and tell this story.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
Well, so there's a lot of threads that I want to pull on your particular experience. But just to kind of set the stage for everyone, can you tell the story, like a quick history of the unit that you were a part of?
Absolutely. So I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school in 1987, and over the years managed to make my way into Force Recon, which was, as I saw it then, the pinnacle of being a Marine. Um, but the Marine Corps was not a part of U.S. Special Operations Command when it formed in 1987. So when it formed, the SEALs went over, the Green Berets went over, the Rangers, the Air Force, but the Marine Corps balked at providing a contribution. And so that was always kind of a source of annoyance for us. We would, because if you were in SOCOM, you got more money, more gear, more missions. So we would get drunk and bemoan the fact that we were we were not allowed in. But following 9/11, the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, recognized that there would be a requirement for more special operations personnel for the global war on terror. So he told all of the other components to grow, and then he told the Marine Corps that this time you're going to contribute. So, and what started as kind of rumors, became like factual. And my man who had been my boss was tapped to lead the unit, and it was going to be a small, roughly 100-man unit, just with a 2-year license, essentially, to prove or disprove whether Marines should be in special operations. And he approached me and said, "Hey, we're going to start this thing up. You want on board?" And it was, I couldn't say yes fast enough. So we trained up without really knowing where we were going to deploy to, or how we would deploy. And about kind of halfway through our training, so we were picked from kind of throughout the Marine Corps, primarily reconnaissance Marines, but also intelligence professionals and everything else, communicators, JTACs, and everything that you need to make a unit run, logisticians and admin personnel. About halfway through, they decided that we would deploy to Iraq underneath a Navy Special Warfare SEAL task group. And so that's what we did, deployed and spent 6 months in and around Baghdad targeting high-value targets. And then at the conclusion of that, after quite a bit of deliberation, the decision was made that the Marine Corps would stand up its own Special Operations Command.
Well, I want to go back to the beginning. You mentioned, this Colonel Coates. What guidance did he give you as you're joining this organization?
So I was going to be one of the 4 team leaders, which was for me, I was the junior of the 4, not by a lot, but the other guys were, I considered to be like a class above me. They'd been around another 3 or 4 years and had a little more experience. So I was, kind of starstruck, and awed that I would have this opportunity. But he brought me into his office, and again, it was the kind of colonel that you were nervous anytime you went into his office, even though we had a pretty good relationship. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard it from him, but he said, "Hey, John, or Dailey, Gunny," he probably would have called me. You know what my expectations are. You can pick whoever you want, but they have to be tough, rugged bastards with hard backs and strong feet. And everything else after that was lost. I was, and I walked out of there thinking, then I shit you not, I'm like, I am going to write a book someday, and it's going to be called that, Tough, Rugged Bastards, because that's the kind of the coolest.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you wrote about a little bit about that in the book when he told you that. How important, I guess, as you look back on your career, because you continue to serve, and in some regard you're still serving right now. And how important is guidance as far as I guess the way Colonel Coates couch that for you?
Super important because it was, and it was definitely a lesson that I learned from him is, commander's guidance. Give enough to make sure that the mission will get accomplished, but not so much that it hampers the execution. And that was it was that sort of guidance that he gave. Tough, rugged bastards. We know what that means is that I had to consider everybody that I wanted on my team and really ask myself, hey, is this person a tough, rugged bastard? Can they keep up? Are they a good piece of gear, right? And that's absolutely something that I've tried to, in my leadership emulate is not over, talk, right? Can I let people, their creativity will always surprise you if you give them the opportunity. And recognize that mistakes aren't not in combat. Mistakes aren't fatal.
Yeah, and that's a great point, John. And that's something I've learned as well. Is like, is that like as a leader, while it's cool, I guess in your own mind to have all the great ideas, you can multiply that 10, 20, 500 fold by allowing the ideas from the bottom to bubble to the top. But you can only do it if that commander's intent, that guidance is like you said, broad enough to accomplish the mission, but not too specific enough to hamper initiative, to where everybody's constantly running back to the tower asking for permission or mother may I. They're able to move out a lot faster and a lot with a lot more energy than controlling every aspect of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the military does not do a great job of that by and large. So you can only have that sort of relationship if you have trust, a level of trust between the commander and the commanded. And quite often, I'll hear people say, hey, I want creative thinking. I want, I don't think that you do. I think that you want somebody to come up and say exactly what you would say, which would be the same thing that your, mentor the same way they would have done it and the same way that their mentor would have done it. Because we have a tendency to become, really set in a rut in military planning a lot of times. And so it definitely requires a level of trust, both in both directions to engender that sort of creativity.
But you said strong backs, hard feet. And then, throughout the book, one of the things you constantly talk about is the mental aspect of the game. What did you learn throughout your career, specifically involving like things like breath work, meditation, and then there's some other stuff too I want to get to, but I want to hear your thoughts on those too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned in boot camp. I remember the first, and I had put a pack on and in preparation for boot camp, but in boot camp, and we had to go on I don't even know how far it was. It probably wasn't that far of a hike to get out to our field training phase. And I remember the pack being so heavy and my feet hurting so bad that and just thinking there's absolutely no way I'm ever gonna make this. I'm like, but then again, I'm looking at this guy in front of me who's not as fit as I am, or shorter, or fatter, or whatever. And I'm like, if this guy's making it, I can make it. And that's something kind of clicked then. It's like, hey, you can, you're walking, you can put a foot in front of the other. You can keep doing this until the point that you can't. And at that point, it'll kind of, the decision will be taken out of your hands. But, you need to pass out before you'd quit. And so that, as I started, growing in the Marine Corps and reading, more military related stuff, I really did find a lot of parallels in other militaries, and the Japanese, obviously, and the samurai, and the Spartans, the Roma. You'd read about the techniques that militaries would use to overcome harsh, the harsh realities of war through harsh training. And so it wasn't until a while in until I discovered breath work, and I don't even know how. Really, it was just kind of box breathing, the kind of entry level, 4 in, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, and really, it was about the time that heart rate monitors started kind of coming in vogue, and we would put them on and just work to bring our heart rate down through breathing, and then go up and shoot, and or go for a run and come in and uh, go straight into shooting, and you could absolutely tell the difference that heart rate played. Um, so I became a big fan of that before I got into. That's kind of like the gateway drug maybe to meditation, but um, meditation I didn't get into until um, after that deployment. I came back and ran into a woman who was running classes. And at that point, I've always believed that there's these little things that we can learn, that may be big things, but they kind of chip away at the edges of your capability, or your lack of capability. And everything from, so I would experiment with anything you could, I would read about, and I read a lot. So, Native Americans who would use techniques to see in the dark, and there's uh, dervishes in India that would walk pitch black, through these mountain passes. And so I was always just looking for ways to improve, to chip away at limitations. And meditation, I got into it. This lady was running classes on base, really focused at helping with PTSD. And the more I sat in them, and not from a PTSD perspective, but just from a relaxation perspective, and I found a lot of the same benefits that I saw from breath work. And so I tell the story in the book, but I was sold. Once I got in, I get into something, I get into it in a big way. So I invited her out. I'm like, hey, I need you to come out and teach this to all of my instructors. Um, so I bring her out. She puts on some music, explains kind of what we're going to do. We've got a bunch of battle hardened, the first batch of what will be the Marine Raider instructors, and they're skeptical, to say the least. There's a lot of them that are bitching and moaning and don't want to be there, but I told them we're going to do it, so we're going to do it. So we turn down the lights, everybody's sitting there. She turns on music, and we go into meditation. I hear some commotion behind me, and maybe 20 minutes, maybe we sit there, and then she turns off the tape, opens her eyes, and I open my eyes and look around, and we're the only two still in the room. Everybody else had snuck out the back door. So it took a little while, but it's definitely, I've seen it's now almost 20 years after the fact. There's a lot more acceptance, I think, within particularly within special operations, recognition that there's a lot of some of the things that may have seemed foreign, offer a lot of opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I think I think that's such an important point. And, like what you were talking about earlier, like it comes back to, like, spent your career looking for things that would give you a competitive advantage, specifically on the battlefield. So like in training, discovering breath work and using that, because like, for those that are unfamiliar with it, like as soon as like you start like getting really stressed out and hyperventilating, like basically like your flight or fight like kicks in, and you're not really able to like kind of think through the problem at hand, and like calmly think through it and make accurate decisions. And so the breath work that John's talking about kind of slows, because like your breath is connected to your brain and kind of slows things down, and so you can like literally like slow time down and be able to focus on the task at hand instead of worrying about 1,000 different things, which will get out of control if you are not controlling your breath. And I found that even in, leading in my last organization, when things got really stressful for me, being able to just slow things down with my breathing allowed me to focus. And I think, finding those things in training because you did. I mean, I think you talked about in the
Mhm.
book, like you ended up using that stuff in combat, and we're
Oh,
sitting,
absolutely.
we're having a conversation today because of it.
Yes, yeah, no doubt. Here's, I mean, and really a lot of it started for me. Before I ever saw combat, I had, when we went through close quarter battle training, we'd bring in FBI, hostage rescue guys, and they would talk about studies and talk about Jeff Cooper and the color codes were really big, the fight or flight response. And, um, that fascinated me. The fact that, when fight or flight kicks in, there's, a series of relatively predictable and, potentially debilitating events occur, pretty quickly. So you lose fine motor skills. Once your heart rate starts racing, you can and have a thing called auditory exclusion where you can't hear as well. Perceptual narrowing where you kind of look like you're viewing the world through a toilet paper tube, and all of these things we recognize when you talk to somebody who is mugged, right? They don't remember much of anything, right? They didn't hear anything. There's their world existed in this little tiny bubble, and those were all in a attempt by the body to prepare itself to fight or flee. And so I became fascinated by that and tried to read as much as I could on it. But it wasn't until I actually, in 2001 found myself in a gunfight in Afghanistan that all of those things, I recognized them because I knew what they were. I had at least heard about them. And so after that, like it really just ramped up for me that, hey, there's as somebody who then, after Afghanistan went to be an instructor, like I have a responsibility to learn as much about this as I can, learn ways to defeat it. And that was really where the breath work thing started. If your heart's racing and that causes bad things to happen, then how do bring your heart rate down?
Well, this is the example you're sharing is like you pulled something that maybe wasn't necessarily in a field manual anywhere
Mhm.
and brought it with you. What role did reading play throughout your career as an NCO?
Oh, it was huge. I was fortunate that my father was a really big reader and read, to me from the time I was little, and had what I considered was like the biggest library in the world until I saw a real library, but just packed full of books that had been his when he was a kid. So like the original Hardy Boys and Tarzan and Zane Grey and Jack London and all of these books that and I lived in the middle of nowhere out in the kind of mountains, foothills between Virginia and West Virginia, and so I would just read. I mean, books were kind of my companion. When I got older and started knew I was going in the military, there was just tons of books on Vietnam. So they came next, and then all of the post-apocalyptic novels that were kind of written around that time. But books, First Blood, and as I kind of grew in the Marine Corps, Charles Henderson's Marine Sniper, and then that led to the Bear Went Over the Mountain, and so I absolutely think that reading is responsible for 80% of the success that I had. Just being able to reach back and pull something out, and that's proven itself time and time and time again.
Yeah, in the book you talk about Stoics and the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. How did that come into play while you were in training or combat?
Mm. So that the first time I read it was actually in Iraq. It was given to me by the SEAL commander who was in charge of us, and later he went on to command the Naval Special Warfare Center, and he would give a copy to every instructor that checked in, which I thought was really cool. Um, I don't know how I had not read it before then, but it was just kind of mine. I guess I had just thought philosophy was not a tangible thing, but when I sat down and read it, then it just was kind of mind blowing. I was like, there's so much of this ancient wisdom here that I need to learn more about, and so that led to I tend to read in bunches. I'll read something and then I'll like, oh, I have to read all of the Stoics or all of the, uh, then I'll get on another kick and I'll go deep. So I have a tendency to do that, I guess, go deep into things and try to make connections.
Yeah, I do the same. And like I just, as I was taking command in Germany, where, that area of Europe where Marcus wrote, supposedly wrote the Meditations on the Northern Frontier. I read it again and it took on another like flavor for me, because now I'm in a position where I'm in charge of people. People are, I've got yes men and yes women. Like, you run the gambit and you have to kind of sort through all that, and you got to deal with drama in the organization and everything else. And so I remember reading it, and man, I was like, this is, this is, his words are really are real to me right now. And one of
Uh,
them that comes to mind was, and for those who aren't familiar with meditations and what John and I are talking about, this was Emperor Marcus Aurelius's personal journal. And really what it was he was just writing down a bunch of stuff to remind himself to be a better person.
mm,
And kind of working through things on paper. And so one of the things that he said is like, beware of becoming Caesarified, dyed in purple. And he was just trying to like remind himself, like,
mm,
hey, like, don't become that toxic leader of Rome. Like, remember who you are and lead with your
mm,
values and your virtues. And so, anyways, I just read that right before
mm.
I took command, and it just really, really stuck with me. Another thing that you talk about in there was one of your favorite poems that kind of stuck with you is "If" by Rudyard Kipling, which it's off camera right now, but I also
Uh,
have that up on the
oh,
wall in here. That's a big one for me as well.
yeah. I mean, I think that's again, that I read at a very young age, and I probably read a book. I know I read in a book, or the idea that it used to be much more common to memorize poems. You were just required to do that, and that's something that young men did, and that was that sort of poem. And so I memorized it from a pretty young age, and would always like spout it off at until it became uncool. So when quoting Rudyard Kipling wouldn't help pick up chicks, but it's something that at times I would write down a portion of it and stick it on the mirror and I in dive school to remind me or when I was going through hard things. Sometimes I would just sit down and copy the whole thing out from memory over and over. Just it's definitely also um, was probably one of the earliest things that I read where I'm like, man, these words, a page worth of words like has incredible meaning to me. I'd read a lot of books and things, but that was like, hey, this thing really does something to me. And that was kind of the first lesson that writing could do that, I think, for me.
What was the I'm gonna put you on the spot here. What was like the stanza or the part of the poem that like that you put up on your mirror to help get you through dive school?
There was the last one. If you can keep your head, or if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and all that is in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Um, I think I've bastardized some of the words over the years in my head, so I may have transposed one or two, but that was the thing, was just keep running, right? Just keep going. That's a favorite, but at different times, different ones, different stanzas will kind of resonate with me at different moments, I guess.
Okay, there's something else I want to talk to you about. So we were kind of talking about the reading, that the role it played for you and how it helped you build that mental toughness. And I'm trying to recall it right now. But there's like you talk about it in the book, but it's kind of like this idea that whenever you're faced a problem, you can either I think it was like fight, it was like flee, fight, or like break down, and only one of those is going to get you. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's freezing and fleeing or delaying the inevitable. I think if that's what unless you're really fast, and we we haven't, one of the things with evolutionary change is that we have not yet evolved to recognize that at the speed of a bullet. Right? So trying to run away from an enemy is usually, in combat is a bad idea, obviously, because you can't run fast enough. And freezing is, might be good for a doe, in the woods, but it's, generally, not that there's not value in it sometimes, but in combat, again, decisive action usually wins the day.
Yeah, I love that. And just like even again applying it to life, like you can sit here and you can ruminate over something, you can stress about it, you can just, like let it tumble around in your head. Or you can run away, ignore it, or you can move through it. I think that's such great advice. Another motto that you had in your organization, which I think is brilliant, is we do windows.
Yeah. Yeah. That I don't know where that, I mean, it came from back in the day that, I guess housekeepers or whatever were like, hey, I don't do the windows, right? But I don't know how we latched onto it, but I was, like I said, I was the youngest team leader, and probably had a little bit of a, definitely had a little bit of a complex, right? So I was like, hey, in order to make our mark, we're going to be the guys that will do whatever. And that was really the large organization. We also had that as we had a lot to prove. We had to prove to Naval Special Warfare that we were capable, to the commanders we were working for, to the Special Operations Task Force, and then ultimately to the U.S. SOCOM. So being willing to do whatever it takes to make the mission succeed, and I think that was that mentality has been responsible for probably whatever success I've had in my career, just being the guy that'll do whatever, and not being too good to do whatever. As a leader, not being too good to pitch in and do the work. Um, and then it certainly lent, itself to our success as a collective.
Yeah, returning real quick, returning to I just want to share this because I'm I think like 45 days beyond retirement right now. But you wrote this in the book, and this really resonated with me. And I guess, maybe if I was 20 years younger, it would have a different paragraph would have, but it's actually two of them I want to read. It says, with the things we carried came the things we destroyed: ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, livers, and frequently long-term relationships. While this life caused many marriages to end quickly, damage to the body was insidious and slow on its onset, kept at bay because we needed to continue to operate. And then a couple of paragraphs later, it said, if ignored long enough, a nagging pain simply becomes the cost of doing business. Then after you retire, you discover that vitamin M, which is Motrin for those that don't know, should not be chewed for breakfast. Then you realize that a 40-year-old should be able to descend a staircase without turning sideways and keeping a death grip on the railing, or that rising from bed shouldn't require mental preparation. And I love that because man, I can't tell you how many veterans probably listening to this can relate to that. And it seems like my body held on until the very last moment. And then all of a sudden, like, can't walk upstairs and everything just started falling apart on me.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it does because you require it to, right? Until you don't. And that part and the part that preceded it was a kind of an homage to the things they carried, by Tim O'Brien, because that was a hugely influential book, and I wanted to work some way in there to kind of make that connection. As really, I think it would be impossible for anybody who, even that was a work of fiction, to any military writer today to not be influenced by him. So that was my little deliberate homage.
Well, speaking of writing, what was the impetus for you sitting down and writing a memoir?
So I had written one of those essays some years before, and thought it was great, and got rejected by 20 uh, um, literary journals when I sent them in, over a period of about 5 years before it was finally published. But I let, and I really had no intention of writing a memoir. I had thought I would write a history of the unit at some point, um, but I had the good fortune to meet a lady who was doing research for a book, and I had provided some assistance. And she was like, "Hey, can I read some of your writing?" So I sent her this essay. She was like, "Hey, hope you don't mind." I sent it to my agent, and he wants you to he wants you to turn this into a book. And so I said, "Okay, I guess." So it's you know, I'm glad that I waited as long as I did, because I think there's memoir loses a lot, or it doesn't gain a lot until it actually becomes memoir, which I think is probably somewhere at 20-ish years after. I think you have to have rumination and time to bake before and you have to hopefully earn a little bit of wisdom. If otherwise it's just stories. And stories are great, but I think that to really be effective as a memoirs. I mean, that's what it means in French, right? Memories, right? You've got to look back, and you've got to be a different person writing it than you were when you lived it.
Well, I'm curious, like right now in the Army, the Chief of Staff of the Army, his big push is to get both officers and NCOs writing more, a lot more professional discourse. From a reflection standpoint, how helpful was this for you?
It was massively helpful, not so much I mean, and I do believe, and I work with a couple of organizations that help try to promote veteran writing and get veterans to write, whether or not it's for publication or just, a lot of times just getting something out of your head and getting it on paper is the first step, particularly things that are, painful or damaging or whatever the case is. For me, it really wasn't that. I said I'd always thought that I would write it. Whether I would, publish it was the question. But I felt that I would not write it until I could write it, if that makes sense.
It
And
does.
like I said, I needed some space, but I also needed some skill. And you know, the best way to learn to write is to read a lot. So I already had that going for me. And post my retirement, I got into a writing program, and that absolutely taught me, and it's absolutely not mandatory to be a successful writer at all. But for me, I think it was really beneficial to surround myself with writers.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. I'm just curious, did it help you process a lot of those experiences you hadn't tapped into since you left?
It did. One of the things, if you read particularly Admiral Stockdale's book, where he talks about being a POW in Vietnam, one of the things that struck me when I read it was that and a lot of POWs will recall memories that they had long forgotten. Like I think it was him that went through every class that he was in, and from first grade on, and recalled who was sitting at every desk. Right, just because all that information is in your head, you just don't use it, and it gets it locked away. So, when you spend time kind of diving into your memory, things start to open up. So I started just having recollections of things that weren't necessarily traumatic, but just things that I had absolutely forgot. And once the kind of dam is breached, then these things just start pouring out. You're like, oh man, I totally forgot, but I can remember like conversations with absolute clarity. Um, and so it was kind of rewarding, to kind of go back and relive some of those moments.
I know you retired earlier, but I'm curious, like, did this help at all? I know we were like talking about, like it was good for you to unlock memories, but like, has this kind of helped let go part of, I mean, maybe something you were holding on to, like events you were holding on to in your career that like once you got it in writing, whether it made it into this book or, got cut in the editing process,
Mhm.
but just getting it on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was, and like I said, not like horribly traumatic events, but I realized that there were some like beliefs that I had that were while they were probably useful for me at the time, weren't. They were just things that I had you know uh, like a set of like a jacket that you've worn so long you forget you have it on, and
Yeah.
I like, oh, it's time to take this off now. It's not cold outside, and I don't need it. So that was, I talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and I really kind of, didn't understand it. Uh, and I thought I was the only person in the world that had it. So, talking with people in preparation for the book and realizing that, almost everyone has that to some level, and if not, they're probably like psychos. And then at the you know higher levels of higher in special operations units, I mean, people are masking a lot of insecurities by a lot of like bravado.
No,
And
get
so
out of here.
realizing that, I was like, wow, I thought I was just everybody else was super cool, and I was this dork sitting over here. And I was like, man, I probably still was a dork, but at least I wasn't totally alone.
Yeah, I know for me just sitting down and like I was doing an active duty, but I know now I think it's becoming a more important practice now that I'm out and navigating transition. What advice would you give if you could go back in time to like Private Daily,
Mhm.
or even like in like new NCOs coming in
Mhm.
today, like talking about some of those jackets you may have worn over 19 summers that you didn't really need to wear. What advice would you go back and give them?
um, and I get to give this advice to 20 something guys coming into Marine Special Operations like all the time. One of the things I do tell them related to that, and I tell them that this is something that I absolutely didn't know until recently, is that you get a lot farther being yourself than you will, try to be someone else. Um, Particularly when you're going to be working with a group of people that you may have to, trust your life to. Particularly in situations where you're trying to, you're going through a difficult course, or you're a new leader. Um, and I'm almost reluctant to say that because, as a new NCO, there is a value in putting on the NCO coat and saying, all right, well, I'm just going to do what this guy does. But you can only do that for a little while. And, eventually you've got to kind of grow into your own skin. And so I still, am really leaning more that way that, the I felt a lot of the time I was in, I would, just, like you said, just kept putting on coats, right? I was like a chameleon. I'm like, hey, who do I need to be successful now? And it worked. But I was also, it took a while to unwind after I retired and figure out who the hell is John Dailey really. He's not this guy or that guy or that guy, and peeling off layers. Um, so I think, being yourself as cliche as that may be, is the best version of yourself, and obviously the self that is up to the task of the job that you're given. The yourself that is, we'll get the mission accomplished and do what needs to be done, but yourself.
Yeah, that's and it's so hard to do. And again, this is something that like I'm kind of working through now is like, when I was in command, like yes, it was me. And like it's something I learned from Diamond Dallas Page, the wrestler, when I interviewed him.
Yeah.
He said that the best wrestlers in the business are themselves, but themselves with the volume turned up a little bit. And so like for me, like command, there was part of me that was me, but it was like me turned up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also was putting on the role of commander. Like I couldn't say and do things that maybe I would do because I am the commander, or like I would have to make decisions that maybe I personally wouldn't have made, but like I'm doing it for the greater organization because that's what's required of the commander. And I think like if you put enough of those personas on throughout a career, whether it's gunny, lieutenant colonel, whatever, I think when it's finally time to put all that stuff away is figuring out like, who's John Dailey or who I am. And I think, I imagine that just from hearing you talk is like writing kind of helped you work through that process a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was, it was kind of exacerbated for me because I retired, and I always tell people I retired on a Friday. I just showed up on Monday, and so they gave me a job, and that's largely the same job, same. So it took me another couple of years as a government civilian employee to realize that I wasn't in anymore. So I just kind of doing all the same things. And then I kind of built, this new persona that hey, here's the way I've got to be. And I've got a lot of it was still, this idea across the military, but I think it's more prevalent in special operations that, you know, you've got to be the best. And you're trying to outrun, outruck, guys who are your son's age, you can only do that for so long. So, realize that, hey, I need to give up some of these things and, focus on being a better. And that's really, I think, when I started, and it was absolutely in this process that when I realized that I started gaining wisdom. I think kind of when, experience met, you know, age. I'm not sure what it was, but one day I woke up and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking differently. And I'm like, I think this is wisdom. And, the more I started trying to impart, some hard-earned wisdom to guys, the more I realized that, hey, this is a really good role for me, right? I could be a mentor, I could be a coach, I don't have to be the doer anymore. I can be the has-been guy that just offers wise counsel, hopefully, and good advice.
Yeah, and that's I think I even quoted that in the let me see if I can find it real quick. Um yeah, yeah, I think you wrote it in the book. Um that like kind of where you're at right now, like this is like the gift you're giving is, in this book is all those hard earned lessons that you like now you're at a place, right? I'm trying to make sure.
I definitely I talk about that. I mean, I was definitely thinking that. I don't remember how I worded, but yeah,
It was
absolutely.
beautiful.
I mean, it's a privilege, to have this opportunity now, which a lot of military folks don't. I think you get out, you retire, you go do something else. I've had the luxury of being around almost as long as I was in at this point. I'm approaching 18 years, which it seems crazy, but it's you know just a total honor to still be useful and to share and most of the lessons that or at least a lot of the lessons I learned by screwing up, right? Or I learned them the hard way. So if I can, help a couple of guys prevent, making some of those same mistakes, then, it'll be a life well spent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just found it because I highlighted it in the monthly reading list email. You wrote, I look back to a time when I felt like I knew everything and had so much to offer. Now I realize that I still have much to learn and nothing to offer but words, but I am grateful for the hand I get to play and hope to play it well. And I think, if you read Tough Rugged Bastards or listen to this interview, know what you're doing in your day job, you see that like you're still trying to wake up every day and play that hand well. So I'm glad I found that, was able to read that before we tie down the
That was
interview.
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. I do that too sometimes. I'm like,
I was surprised myself sometimes.
yeah, I do that too. I'm like, man, where did these words come from? I don't even remember writing that. If folks read the book or listen to this interview and want to find you, where can they reach out to you at?
So I have a website, jadailey.com, and that's on there. There's, talks about the book, but there are links to the 2 newsletters that I have that go out weekly. And both of them are kind of an extension of this, trying to, process things, trying to, take some lessons learned in the military and relate them to just getting better at getting better is what I say. The one is more about physical fitness, and it's called Ruck the Fuck Up. And that's, kind of mental toughness meets physical fitness. And the other is called Walking Point. And the thing with that is it's got to be your journey, right? You've got to be the person breaking trail and walking point. And, but you can hopefully have an old guy that's learned a thing or two to, throw some advice at you along the way. So yeah, the website's the kind of the one-stop shop. And you can reach out to me there as well. And in all of the social media, not all of them, but a couple of them. I'm poor at social media.
I'm working on mine too. So, well, John, thank you so much again for sending me a copy of the book. The note up front, that was amazing. And then just for taking time to sit down and have this discussion this evening.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I've had a great time. The time kind of flew by.
It did. Yeah, it did. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the